Yes, well, I started as a cadet engineer back in 1962 with Brisbane City Council, and did my civil engineering degree. I stayed with Brisbane City all my working life. So been with them for 36 years when I took a retirement. I became very interested in the Local Government Engineers Association, as it was then in Queensland. Decided to go to a very early conference and joined up with some of the early guys, and then went to many conferences, and eventually got onto the what's now called the board. Became president from 84 to 86. And then they keep you hanging around for another 2 years as immediate past president. After that, I took on a role with Ray Hill at Logan City Council, managing the LoGov Expo trade show for the engineers. And as Ray eased out of that job, I took it on until 2010, after I had retired from Brisbane City. In that time, I'd visited the other states to see how their shows were going, and you feed off each other. Some of my highlights with the council, I moved through various departments, water supply, sewage, works department, and so on. And my interesting jobs were major roadworks, reservoirs, sewage treatment, and so on. As being such a large local authority, there was access to many disciplines in the civil engineering area. 1991, I think it was, I was lucky enough to get the best paper at the IPWEAQ conference, and I won a national fellowship to go over to the San Francisco Engineers Conference in 91, and report on that back to the next conference, as we did in those days. Again, it was amazing to see when you go to America that Australians were selling themselves a bit short. In fact, we were well ahead in certain areas. So that's probably my happiest times, though, were with the Institute, and such a wide variation of experience. Back in the early days, before I became involved, they had a couple of years general meetings. In those days, it was only the engineers, the chief engineers in local authorities, who also had responsibility for water supply and sewage, who became members. And, but that was before we were formally formed as the IPWEA-QNT, as it was in those days, now the Institute. And the first president in 1972, Jim Abbas, was a great friend of mine, and our office in those days were Jim's backyard shed, and it was all honorary or not honorary volunteer work. He was the secretary, and the gopher did everything at the start. Ray Moore, also there, who eventually became our second president, was there with Jim, and some of the early guys. It was my honour to become a president in the 80s, and I never thought that would happen, but I felt I had to really give a lot back to the engineers who helped me in those days, which is what I tried to do. Working in any one local authority, you can become a little bit grounded and not look at the bigger picture, which is what I wanted to do, get experience with how other guys did it, particularly the guys out west, the isolated guys who didn't have access to whatever technology was available in those days other than the telephone, and actually visiting people to get information from them. to see how those guys battled in the early days, now it's not a problem with the internet and so forth, or not such a problem. That really inspired me, so that's where I got interested in seeing other states and other countries and so forth, see how things were improving all the time. That's so unexpected, it's embarrassing really. But I'm so proud of that and the little bit of help that I gave the Institute in the early days. We first started our meetings in the old local government house, heritage building at Newstead, and to grow to this size, and it's really become an entrepreneurial organisation now, as well as remembering the basics. So the evolution is startling, and I certainly enjoyed my tour of the building. It's probably changed so much since I was in it, and my favourite things were concrete and dirt in those days as an engineer. These days the technology is just advanced out of all belief, but people coming up are born with it these days, and it's all second nature, whereas we have to really struggle with it, but manage to get along. I'd say hang in there, because as serving in local or local government public works, what you're doing is helping your fellow citizens at a real basic level, and there are so many rewards in doing that that come along. You hardly even realise they're happening sometimes, and you get rewarded in various ways. So it's certainly a worthwhile profession.